Joe Locke, on behalf of WUSF 89.7 FM, All Night Jazz, welcome and thank you for joining us so much, for giving us some of your time to talk to you today.
Nice to meet you too. I was listening to some of your music just a little while ago, man, and I love the band. I was listening to some stuff. You know, you sent me your was it your last album, which I loved.
Yeah, we connected, which is one of the reasons you were very sweet. We emailed a bit, and I sent you my latest album. Correct? Yeah,
I really dug it, and I was watching video of the band with the tabla and harmonica and guitar, and the woman playing drums. Really nice band, man.
When did you get very, very good? I'm not talking about good. You're a staggering instrumentalist. Your skills are, you know, the top. One of the top handful of people who's played jazz vibraphone. There's no doubt about that. You've had a star-studded career. I'm always interested with people such as yourself who operate at that level. When did you get very good? Was it between 14 and 16 when you fell out with your dad and so you locked yourself in a room and kind of and felt a bit lonely, so you wanted to get good? Was there a reason? Why did you get good? When did you get good? Can you remember that process and can you talk about it?
Wow, I'll try to do it in a nutshell. I think there were two periods in my life, and I'll be very happy to be very forthcoming because I have nothing to hide, you know.
Well, you downloaded an app to make you good.
I think when I was 13, 14, and when I discovered the vibes, I mean, I'd been playing drums and piano and playing in rock bands and stuff like that. But when I was 13, 14, I found the vibraphone. It really bit me. And I also feel that I was a kid with a lot of insecurities, I think, and I think there was a lot of turmoil in my household at the time with my older brothers and sisters and my parents, and there was a lot of this going on. And I think my bedroom, where I would go and close the door and listen to music and practice, was a place of safety for me. I mean, I didn't feel threatened in my home. There was a lot of love in my home, but there was also a lot of shouting and a lot of you know, and it was a place that I would go to feel like I would feel safe, and I was also really became enthralled with how you do this thing, you know, the improvising thing. So that was a growth spurt for me, and by the time I was 15, I was playing in clubs with much older musicians, playing with an organ trio in the black community in Rochester, New York, where I grew up.
Joe, do you remember between 13 and 15, did you do 5 hours a day? Can you remember a little bit about that?
Just a lot of practicing, man. Just a lot of practicing, a lot of listening. And there were older musicians around me who were like just pointing me in the right direction. I remember going over to people's houses, older musicians, and sitting for hours, like, and listening to the Blue Note catalog and the Prestige albums and all the stuff that so informed my, you know, my love of the music, you know. And I moved to New York City, and I, you know, became, you know, after a lot of stuff in Rochester and some touring, and I moved to New York, and I pursued, you know, a fledgling career as a professional musician. And at that time, you know, some demons also took over. My inclination to abuse alcohol, you know.
Oh, wow.
I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I've been sober for 26 years.
Congratulations.
I always say, well, I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic, and a lot of who I am today, I thank my alcoholism for, because my spiritual philosophy and things that I've learned and the wisdom that I've gleaned has come as a result, I mean, paradoxically, as a result of my disease. So I'm grateful for it, you know.
But you're one of the rare, brilliant, you've made something that could have been a hindrance into a positive, which is an incredibly important life skill for everyone watching and listening, young people. But
well, man, and I feel like, to answer your further answer your question, after I got sober in 1993, and I'd already done a bunch of stuff musically with a lot of named people in New York, but after I got sober, I took my inclination to drink and turned it into an addictive inclination to practice. Wow. And I really experienced a growth spurt artistically in the mid 90s.
But Joe, you weren't 15 in the mid 90s. You were
I was in my 30s. I was in my mid 30s.
That's another really incredible. Like, so you became the player you are now in your mid 30s, not at 19 or 17 or 21. Okay, amazing.
And it was always for me, Simon. It was always and still is. I feel a slow burn of getting better, like a slow burn of getting better. And I feel like right now, man, I feel like I'm getting better.
Yeah,
you know, I feel like right now I've been affording myself the opportunity lately to go back and look at some songs that were hard for me 30 years ago. Songs like Chance by Kenny Kirkland, which I couldn't play at all 20 years ago.
Right,
Very early by Bill Evans, Time Remembered, some of those songs.
Yeah.
And this week I've been working on Countdown, on Train's, piece Countdown. I've always played, 30 years ago, I recorded Giant Steps. Well, no problem. And I'd say 20 years ago, I put 26-2, the Coltrane changes, into my repertoire. And then a couple of years ago, I started to play Satellite. But I was always terrified of Countdown because it's these Giant Steps changes where there's no respite, And because of young musicians I've been listening to, playing these beautiful arrangements of Countdown and just playing the stuffing out of it, I said in the pandemic, okay, Joe, it's time to roll up your sleeves and deal with some Countdown. So I've been studying Countdown lately, and I
that's such a specific thing. What did you do in the pandemic, Dad? Well,
I learned Countdown.
Countdown by John Coltrane, and I can really play it at crotchet equals 220 now. So that's okay.
But it's really funny, man. That's one of the things I've been doing. I mean, there's someone attributed it to the poet Robert Frost, but I'm not sure it was he who said it. But he said, whoever said it, it's something that has a lot of meaning for me. He said, "The older I become, the younger are my teachers," and this has really been happening for me lately. And I'd like to give some regarding that song Countdown. I need to give some dap to a brilliant pianist named Marko Čerčenc.
Okay.
He's from Slovenia, and Marko has a version of Countdown. It's on YouTube.
Okay.
That's this.
Right.
Beautifully artistic and like just the deeply, full of intellectual rigor and soul. And he's playing a trio, and it's just a thing of beauty. And the other version of Countdown that I really love is by a young tenor player who reminds me a lot of my dear friend Bob Berg. His name is Chad Leftwoods Brown.
Okay.
And Chad plays a burning version of Countdown. And I saw these two versions, and I said, okay, Joe, time to get to work, And
it's so inspiring to hear that on so many levels. I think we should play this clip for young people in terms of I'm not going to give away your age, but
I'm 61. Oh.
You're 61 and you're setting yourself challenges. You're making the best of a situation. You're taking life's hardships, flipping them around and making. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine. You're talking about the alcoholism, and I would imagine if there's an addictive nature to your personality, that can always be used as a real positive in terms of, I'm going to practice and be obsessive about that. I can be obsessive about practicing. I can be obsessive about, and when you're a recording artist and an internationally recognized musician such as yourself, I love stories like that. I love hearing about there's always a reason all of us are where we are, wherever we are along the journey, there's always a good reason. I love finding out what that is. And I want to talk about, I've had a handful of days absorbing myself in your music, and there's some wonderful records here, one of which I just want to make sure that everyone in the world listens to. I'll grab it in a second. But I feel like we're in a bit of a time of false emotion. And by that, I mean, you see lots of, there was a lockdown thing where a very famous pop singer was performing, and he or she had a huge amount of emotion. It was in lockdown, so it was with backing tracks, so that's not his or her fault.
Yeah.
But it was auto-tuned to within an inch of its life. So really, I mean, it could have been you or me singing. I couldn't tell any quality to the voice at all. And the material he or she was playing was as bland as dishwater, as the most mediocre thing you've ever heard.
Yeah.
So but she was delivering it with a huge amount of emotion. That's false emotion. It's not backed up by skill or craft.
Yeah.
And watching some of your performance, listening to your records, you're a passionate guy, man. I can see that just in some of our communication and the people we know in common.
Sure.
Talk about it. It seems to me that emotion is important for you when you're performing, that you want to give the audience, it matters to you that they enjoy your performance. Talk about emotion in your music and in performance. And with a background question of, is what we do important? And is the emotional aspect of it one of the things that makes it important?
Communication is the most important thing. It's like sharing is sort of being able to be a mirror to the person who's listening, to express something that's emotional in nature, and for the person listening to identify with what you're sharing, and in that sharing, not feel alone in the world. That's the biggest piece to me. On the point of showmanship, and this is important to me, and I appreciate the opportunity to once again express it. People refer to me, or have often in the past, not lately, but have in the past referred to me as the flamboyant vibes player.
I didn't use that word deliberately because, and carry on.
And talk about my showmanship, and my answer to that is I live in a I'm a bit of a dark horse. You know, I think people who know me peripherally see me as very positive and upbeat and full of energy. But I tend toward cyclical depression, and I struggle to find joy on a daily basis. You know.
Wow.
And so there are times. There are quite a lot of times where I'm living in kind of a dark place. And the bandstand for me is a place where I can shed those shadows. Wow. and experience joy in the making of music. So I take great exception to someone who, in a pejorative way, calls me flamboyant or talks about my showmanship, because I have not given a fucking thought to showmanship in my life.
No,
but the idea of communicating with an audience and making a connection is incredibly important to me. It's one of the reasons why I like to tell stories about the songs that I'm playing. You know, I'd say 95% of the music I write, there's a narrative attached. There's a story attached, because the song usually begins with the song for me begins with the title. It begins with a phrase, or it begins with something literary, or something coming from words. So of course there's going to be a story attached. And I find, for me anyway, Simon, I'm able to, when I can share what the genesis of the song was, and if there's a story, some kind of a narrative attached, I feel like oftentimes it really helps to bring people into the listening experience.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I really like that, and I do too. And I think I want to talk about your composing process, and I'm just going to pick this up. Listeners, viewers, make your life better by buying this, watch it, do whatever. It's an absolute. I knew of you, obviously. I've been in the jazz scene for 20 years, and I've got close colleagues who have worked with you, and we have a lot of people in common. But I did not know this. It's called Signing. It's Joe Locke and Jeff Keezer, Terry On Gully, and Mike Pope.
Yeah.
And it's a staggering album. It's definitely one of the most imaginative, exciting, and creative albums I've heard for a long time. So congratulations, man. And what I love about this, and we missed this. So look at this. This is, for each song by Jeff Keezer and Joe Locke, you get their inspirations, and it's actually in my car at the moment. Yeah, you get the backgrounds. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, I want to know who people are in love with and when they wrote a song, and I want to know what was kind of exciting them or depressing them or making. I think that's half the point of it. And lots of your Four Walls of Freedom suite. Now this is ambitious.
Oh man, stuff. Thank you so much for mentioning these albums, Simon.
Talk a bit about Joe, and for the composers among us, talk a little bit about the literary stimulation, because I don't share that with you, only in the sense that I'm one of those abstract composers. My entire motivation is to do something musically. I want my music to have a set of chords that do a certain thing that are going to interest me or my improvisers or the audience. But you have a lot of literary, poetic stimuli.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. That's really interesting to me.
Well, it's interesting with Four Walls of Freedom. It was a quartet featuring Bob Berg on saxophone, on Gary Novak on drums, and James Genus on bass. And it was intentionally meant as a pianoless quartet, because the name of the project was Four Walls of Freedom, and I felt at the time that we needed to have these four walls, the correlation of four instruments.
You mean without a piano player, you're free? With us in the way, you're just like totally
actually.
Okay, I got it. Right. Nice.
Actually, it's really a challenge for me to play without piano. It really is, man. But the inspiration for that came from, I was reading. I'm not religious at all, but I come from a background of, my father was he lived as a Catholic monk for 2.5 years. He held a vow of silence for 2.5 years.
Wow.
When he was in his early 20s. And my mother was in the convent when she was a young woman. So I come from this this background of heavy religious, kind of background. But my father became a hippie, and my mother became she was always a devout Catholic, but she was a crazy, zany, beautiful woman. But I was reading The Seven-Story Mountain by Thomas Merton, only because that's his famous autobiography. And Merton is great whether you're into Catholic mysticism or Buddhism or just interested in people's spiritual paths, But Merton said in this portion of the book, he said, I entered the monastery, and when I walked into the cell that I was, because basically it's a cell, like how the monks lived.
Right.
It was basically just a small one room. And he said, when I walked into this space that was going to be where I was going to live basically for the rest of my life, he said, rather than being feeling claustrophobic, I felt like I was entering the four walls of my new freedom.
Heavy, man. Wow.
The paradox of that, of these four walls representing true freedom for him. And I thought to myself, so I thought about that, as is often the case with all my writing, a phrase can elicit musical inspiration. And I thought to myself, well, what's the corollary in musical terms to the four walls of freedom? And I thought, well, for me, the four walls of freedom in music are harmony, melody, rhythm, and form. And I started to write this suite, and I started to write at the piano, and one night I was writing, and I heard the protagonist's voice in my head, the instrument the person for whom I was writing, and it was Bob Berg's saxophone sound I heard in my head.
So, okay, this is like gold dust, man. So you're saying you've talked about the literary inspiration in a very real, tangible way. You set yourself about the task of writing. You didn't, bar one, A minor key signature, 4/4, think this is going to be for Bob Berg. You're saying when that all started, when the composition process started, then the sound of Bob Berg came into your mind.
It came in first. I heard the sentence on the page. When I entered my cell, I felt like I was entering the four walls of my new freedom, and I went, boom! The lights went on, and I started writing from like the middle of the suite. It ended up, the first thing I wrote ended up being movement number 3, and then I was writing one night, working on maybe the second movement, and it dawned on me who I was writing it for. And I wasn't in touch with I wasn't in touch with Bob on any kind of regular basis. He was one of my heroes who I knew, but I didn't know well. And I picked up the phone and called Bob, and I said, Bob, this is Joe Locke. I said, I'm writing a suite, and it just dawned on me who I'm writing it for. I'm writing.
And this is Joe. This is because of the shape of the lines, because of the sound you're imagining, because you wanted someone with a certain. He's got that big sound, man, and. Can you talk directly? What was it about the lines you were composing that meant Bob Berg was your man?
I was writing a phrase, and I heard Bob playing that phrase. because his sound is so his sound is so in my DNA, going back to when I used to listen to him as a teenager in Horace Silver's quintet, or this playing with Cedar Walton's quartet, and he had this very amazing acerbic Brooklyn thing, you know. And so that became the Four Walls of Freedom, became the name of the suite and the name of the band. And we came to London and played, and then we played 6 nights at Ronnie's. Then we went into the studio in New York City and did the album, and did a couple of gigs here in the States. And then Bob died in a car accident right after that, you know, shortly thereafter.
I didn't know that, actually. I didn't know how he passed. I'm sorry, man.
Yes.
I mean, I'm really sorry.
So that was that project, and I so appreciate, Simon. I so appreciate you mentioning that album, because it was done for a label called Scirocco, which is a UK-based label, but that did very, very little promotion in the States. And all of the Scirocco music has now been released digitally on all the platforms. So Four Walls of Freedom is finally available, and
wonderful.
And just thank you so much for mentioning it.
Yeah, no, sure. And I'll put it in the text when we publish the interview. But to keep on that thread, again, like digging deep into your career, it seems to me that the composing side of your musicianship, of who you are as a musician, is actually kind of blossomed more recently. That when you started out, you maybe didn't think of yourself as a composer, but now really ambitious stuff. I mean, all these projects. Did you have any classical training as a composer, or any formal training as a composer? You write great, man. Like, I mean, really just incredibly strong writing. Where does that come from?
It's really funny. First of all, man, I knew this was going to be a fun interview, man, because I really enjoyed your interview with Bob James and with Tim, and I just thought, man, what like insightful and like spot on questions, man, because that's absolutely true, man. I feel like I blossomed. It's wow. At the turn of the millennium, I felt like I had this other sort of spurt of growth, and it coincided with my work with Scirocco, with that label, and it coincided with my work with Jeff Keezer and Tim Garland, and I because it's very interesting. I'm completely self-taught as a musician.
Whoa.
But when you say self-taught, I think what that means, rather than I didn't have any teachers, I think rather how I look at that is I had 1,000 teachers. And it makes me emotional to say that, because I have such gratitude for people who've so lovingly helped me along the way. And when you hear Love is a Pendulum or Her Sanctuary from Signing, or any of those things that are more recent, a lot of that comes from the inspiration that I got from playing with Tim and Jeffrey.
Wow.
And sort of the bar that they set as composers. And I said, and as I've always been, I've as a player since I was a kid, it was like, let me aspire to that. Let me see how close I can get to that.
Yeah.
And I still, man, I so appreciate your saying that you like my writing, because you're a very good writer. And I feel like how I feel, I have great respect for composers. And even a suite like Four Walls of Freedom, or a suite like Love is a Pendulum, which has a lot of composition in it.
Yes.
I still think of myself as a songwriter, whereas I look at someone like Tim Garland as a composer.
Well,
and I think there's really a difference.
Let me jump right on that. On Signing, the tracks that are yours have got a lot of counterpoint. I've got a lot of Jeff Keezer's left hand, in unison with the bass, or with you. I mean, they are. It's kind of, the brilliance of it is that it's a very busy texture a lot of the time, but it never feels like hard work. It feels like it grooves, and it makes me smile, and it's exciting. In the same way that bits of Weather Report, you can think, well, actually, there's an awful lot going on there, but it just makes you smile. So, but the thing I've just described is what us composers will see as is beyond songwriting, the counterpoint. So is the counterpoint yours, or is that Jeff Keezer going, actually, I could do this cool thing? Or have you presented him with that material?
No, that's my writing. That's my writing.
Man, then you're much more than a songwriter, man. It's way beyond that.
I see. I've had the privilege, great privilege of being the first person to play some of Tim's music. With Jeffrey. And with
Storms and Nocturnes.
With Storms and Nocturnes, and I always feel like what a privilege it is that he wrote this for me, And when I sit at the piano and play, I could name specific pieces like I'll meet you there, or Repertoli, or there are some others. I'll play it at the piano, and the harmony comes not from vertical harmony from chord changes. The harmony comes from the counterpoint, and I'll play both voices slowly at the piano, and I'll say to myself, this shouldn't work. This should sound like crap, but it sounds like transcendent music, and that's where I just go, he's functioning at a different level, at a higher level, but I think a little of that has rubbed off, I think a little bit of that has rubbed off,
And so again, that's you hearing something by one of your colleagues and you aspiring to, you asking yourself, can I reach that bar? So compositionally, well, man, I mean, that's again, incredibly inspiring for people to listen and find out about. And
I have to tell you too, someone else who, just thinking off the top of my head, who was really inspirational to me was Billy Childs, the great pianist Billy Childs. I remember doing an album with him.
He's a great composer. I mean,
he's a great composer. I think of Tim and Billy because they're both incredible symphonic composers as well, symphonic writers. But I was doing an album with Billy Childs, and it was for a Japanese label, and we were doing music from the cinema.
Your album or Billy's album, or neither? It
was my album. It was my album with Rufus Reid and Gene Jackson.
Nice.
And I had written a bunch of arrangements, but one of the ones that the Japanese producer wanted me to do an arrangement of was the Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel, because it was a main part of The Graduate, the Dustin Hoffman movie.
Of course.
And I had already done a bunch of sort of involved arrangements for the album, and I couldn't think of anything for Sounds of Silence. And I called Billy, who was...
It's intimidating because everyone knows it. That's why it's
right.
difficult, right? Yeah.
And I called Billy, who was going to be the pianist on the date, and I said, Billy, I can't think of anything for the Simon and Garfunkel tune, man. Can you come up with anything? And he just said to me, he said, give me 48 hours. And put the phone
down. Okay.
And when he got back to me, man, what he had written was he started with a Bach sonata, and he had started with just us playing the Bach piece, and then slowly the melody to ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba sneaks into the Bach sonata, and eventually the Bach sonata morphs into the Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. And I just went, this is absolute brilliance. And so those are the kind of composers, arrangers I've been able to hang out with, and be so fortunate to be friends with,
But also that throughout jazz history, until jazz became available in colleges and schools and conservatories, it was an oral musical tradition. That's how it was. Yeah. I mean, until the first real books in the 70s, right? That was what you're describing. The way you've developed your career, the way you bettered yourself as a musician, is always by being smart enough to find the very best people who do the things very well, working with them, and then learning from them. And that's still the best way to learn, I think.
But my background as a jazz musician comes from playing music in clubs in the Black community in Rochester and Buffalo.
Right.
And that's another aspect of my playing that's very much a part of who I am. And when I was growing up and playing in clubs, the social fabric and the music were like this.
Yeah.
I mean, people would come from church after I play Friday night, Saturday night, and then play at a place called the People's Club on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
And everybody would come from church and go straight to the club.
Oh, man, that sounds like a really happy time.
It was looking back, Simon, it was a beautiful, happy time. And it was a time of, like I said, I was 15, 16, 17 years old. and it was a time post the Attica uprising and the Chicago riots and the riots in Watts and a lot of racial upheaval. But I was embraced like family by the Black community in Rochester and Buffalo, and the social fabric and the music were so important and part and parcel of one another and fed one another, that this is what I think the loss is in music being a conservatory-based, jazz being a conservatory-based music now.
Yeah. Let's talk about, because I want to, New York City since June the 13th, 1942, at about 11:30 p.m. when Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie started making bebop, has been the center of the jazz universe.
Yeah.
And that's an undoubted fact of life. And unfortunately, in the last 2 months, New York's been the center of the universe for a different reason with the pandemic.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, you've just recently moved to New Jersey, and you scour social media, and I feel there's a bit of like, well, I want to talk a bit about what your kind of prognosis is for New York City, and that the clubs, you go to Smalls and then you walk down the street to Mesro and everyone's queuing outside. These are all things, Smalls is just like packed. I mean, when are we going to be back at Smalls? When are we going to be when's a big band going to be standing next to each other? But do you feel your colleagues might want to flee the city? Not that that's what you did, you wanted more space and stuff, but talk a bit about New York. You're obviously 35 years there. It's important to you. This is important times, man. It's really important we save it, right?
It's it's amazing to me, Simon, how I left the city just because you get to it. As I said, it was 5 years ago, and for me, as I think probably most people would, you get to a point where you're living this very exciting sort of fast-paced life that London offers or that New York City offers, And after doing it for a long time, you start to get tired of that kind of pace and that kind of energy, that kind of hyperactive energy. And I started going to places, like one place in particular. I was teaching at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, and I got off the plane and I went into the center of the town of Appleton.
Right.
And I looked around. This is about maybe 10 years ago, and I looked around and I went, Appleton, Wisconsin. I could do this.
Felt good. Yeah.
And I started to realize that the love affair with New York City was sort of coming to an end. I believe it started at some point after 9/11.
For you, though, you're talking for you.
For me, yeah. There was a beautiful, after 9/11, there was this incredibly beautiful heartbreak that we were all sharing. And I remember several occasions where I would meet the gaze of a stranger on the street in the days after, and we would just embrace.
Wow. It's beautiful.
And embrace, and then kind of pull away from each other, and then it was go, thanks, I needed that, or how are you doing? And then just walk away.
Yeah.
But there was this. All of the barriers were down in our heartbreak, for what had happened, and that was a beautiful time in New York City because the solidarity was so intense,
And you can't do that now. You can't embrace anyone. We're all behind the. It's the opposite.
Although we all want to, I mean, many of us want to. Like we want to. I miss being able to be,
close to people,
in touch and to make contact with my friends, with my loved ones. But it's really interesting for me, Simon, to go back to New York and the music. I feel that this is my personal take on it. Is that even before 9/11, long before 9/11, Manhattan was becoming more and more this bastion of the wealthy and entitled. The artists were being pushed out to the outskirts more and more, and working class people were being pushed out, and all of the things that made New York and continue to make it great aren't the hedge fund managers. It's the working class people and the artists and the people who are being creative on that island, and it started just to become more, rich kids with their parents' American Express, platinum card, ordering more cocktails, and I would see it. When I moved to New York in 1981.
Wow.
The Upper West Side, even still, which is now hoi polloi, it was even a little dodgy.
Yeah.
When I moved to New York in 1981, Times Square was still very much a place, where the pimps and hookers and drug dealers were hanging out. But I preferred it to what's happening now, which is it's a Midwest, theme park,
Well, Fred Hirsch, have you read Fred Hirsch's book from a couple of years ago?
One of the few autobiographies that I recently that I've read that I truly loved.
Yeah, I thought it was very moving, and it's just a beautiful piece of writing. But he talks about having a huge apartment or a loft space in Greenwich Village in the 80s. I mean, are you kidding? How can we do a gig for $80 and then have a loft space in Greenwich Village? I mean, Hendrix in the 60s used to live in New York City, right? I mean, they were all, so you're talking about the current problems as actually, unfortunately, being one of a sort of series of problems we've had. And I don't want to use the word decline because none of us want that, but how are we it's got to be a change of system, of politics, of everything, right? I don't want to go too far down the politics thing, but it's not working for creative people. I was thinking the other day, the billionaires going to sort of sit in their ivory towers and stare across through glass windows at each other, but who's going to make their lattes that cost $7, and who's going to play in the piano bars, and who's going to give the city the life and the culture? I mean, I don't know. Any thoughts?
I mean, it's a really funny thing that I think in the way of, it was amazing. I was listening to Tim Garland's interview with you yesterday, and I was listening, and you asked him a similar question. And Tim is just this font of positivity and hope,
Yes, yes.
And all of those sentiments are contained in his music, and Tim had a lot of hope. I think the thing that gives me hope is the fact that when I moved to New York in 1981, it was tough, man. It was tough to be a young musician who moved here with $200 in his pocket and a set of vibes.
Really?
Wow. But it's that times 10 for a young musician moving to New York now. When I moved to New York, the apartment that I found was $289 a month. And it was hard for me to make the rent even then. Now the rents are 10 times that for the same place. But the thing that gives me hope is that when I go out and as I've done so many times to go out to check out young musicians, first of all, the level of art of art and the level of accomplishment is so high, and young musicians are managing to deal with the economic reality of New York while they're getting better and better artistically.
How are they doing that?
That's what I want to know. How are they doing that? How are they? And they're playing for the same fees that I was making in 1981 when I moved to New York.
Do you mind me throwing this out there? Because I taught at junior conservatory level in London for 12 years. And when I don't want to make this about me, but I think there's a point here. It was a little bit like when I went to junior conservatory, I got a scholarship. I didn't pay anything for it. And in my class was people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and they were there purely because they had great musical potential. Now, when I was teaching, most of the kids at the conservatory, not all of them, were the children of wealthy people. And so the jazz that they're making, and there's a kind of middle-class jazz thing in London now, not exclusively, and the people making jazz are outstanding, and I don't deny them anything at all, but there is a little bit of that that's seeping through. If the great opportunities are only happening for wealthy people, we're going to have kind of middle-class jazz. I mean, I don't know what that's going to say. I'm middle-class. I don't want to be myself, and this is sounding hypocritical, so it's not about me. It's about making sure that everyone with something to say and some talent is got the opportunity to make music. And if they're making it work, these young people you're talking about in New York City, dare I say there is some family money behind them. I don't know. I mean, we're going to have
it's a funny thing. It's taking us afield of the, speaking about the coronavirus, but it's a tributary that I'm happy to go down. You know, I feel that, you know, I've historically had a problem with what jazz education has become in America.
Is it a problem if jazz is a middle class thing? And I was thinking whilst we were off air about, you know, Miles Davis, his father was a dentist. He was a middle class, he came from a middle class family. That's not true of Billie Holiday or Louis Armstrong. So great music can come from lots of places, but we were talking about an important thing, and I would love to know your thoughts about it. You've seen the scene in New York. I told you a little bit about the scene in the UK and how there is a little bit of white middle class jazz thing going on. And they're all great players. They deserve everything they're getting. Does that matter? I don't know.
I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a musician. I mean, you have no control over where you land. You know, when you come into the world. You know. Yes. But I think what does matter is that the music is available in an educational setting if you can afford $60,000 a year, which it is here, you know, which is ludicrous, which is absolutely ludicrous. And just to say, so I feel like this music is, I mean, this music is social music. This is music that comes, it's folk music. It's music that comes from the street, and for it to be co-opted by a wealthy conservatory setting, and then to have it codified in this academic way, and then make it only available for those who can pay up, who can pony up financially, is not cool with me. On a positive note, man, there are people whose names I will not mention now, who are doing, because they're in the midst of working hard to change that, and there are some people who are actively now working to try to change the dynamic of jazz education being so expensive, and I really believe that it should be available for those who want it. You know, I've always been, because in the past I was never dependent on teaching to make a living. I always taught for free, because it was information that I'm like happy to impart, because I'm excited about it. So I'm happy to impart the information, and I've had this sort of rude awakening of late, since the pandemic, that because, I mean, as with many of my colleagues and friends, I've lost a tremendous amount of income just over the last few months with the cancellations of touring. It's been difficult, and I think, wow, I may now become more dependent.
You've got to generate your income somewhere,
on my teaching. You know, I may become more dependent, and I may have to charge on a more regular basis. But I've always felt that the music, that it really has become music that's available only to the progeny of the wealthy, you know, and it's not cool with me in any way, shape, or form. It's not the way I learned the music. I didn't come from wealth, and I learned how to play on the street from older musicians who took me under their wings. You know.
Wow. One of the most creative bands you have is the Joe Locke, Jeffrey Keyser band, and that's been very successful, and you've got a long-standing relationship there. But I've got a couple of very juicy questions for you.
I love it.
Well, it's very hard for me not to give my opinion in these conversations, but I'll try. You play a polyphonic instrument. You probably play the big polyphonic instruments are the guitar and the piano, and there's a million of us who play those things, and we're all trying to do a bit, and look, have you seen that chord? And then you're in this elite instrument, the vibraphone, which, not elite in a bad way, but just less people play it. But it's polyphonic. But you choose to spend most of your working life with a piano player. And we know, obviously, you know, Jim Hall, Bill Evans, it's obviously possible to have two polyphonic instruments which can do lots of the same jobs in the same band. It takes a certain type of musician. I can't imagine the Keith Jarrett trio with the guitar. I think that would be a problem. but
who would that guitar player be?
I don't know. I've always thought how Pat how Pat Metheny and Keith Jarrett never made a record together. I always thought that was interesting.
No,
I mean, they haven't and they won't. But
yes,
you know, when Pat did, he went to Brad Mehldau. I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, talk about working with a piano player. Why do you need someone else doing the same job as you? That's not true, but I'm just kind of
sure.
Poking you.
Because I love the actually Tim said it in his interview with you in the recent interview. He said that he loves that rich harmonic carpet underneath him, and that he probably, although there are a lot of tenor trios with saxophone, bass, and drums, that if you go see him play, chances are it's going to be with a chordal instrument because he loves that carpet underneath.
But he can only play one note at once. You can play four if you want.
Yeah, and I enjoy playing trio, but in my I play. I'm most at home functioning like a horn player, playing single lines, and being the protagonist like a singer in front of the band. And if you think of Milt Jackson or Bobby Hutcherson, they're two mallet players.
Yeah.
The difference between us is that I simply always hold four, in case I want them, but I don't. But a lot of times I don't often use. I'm not employing all four.
Okay.
But I'm a four mallet player in that I do solo recitals on occasion. The first time I did a solo concert on Vibes, Fred Hirsch was sitting in front of the Vibes at the concert right in front of me. And I just wanted to say, please, Fred, please don't.
Just sit for the back.
This is hard enough without you sitting here, So in those kind of contexts, I play a lot of four mallets stuff. And I love exploring harmony and having the liberty and the freedom to pick what the voicing is going to be and how I want to alter it or extend it or
there we go, right.
muck it up, But I happen to love working with great pianists, and I don't have a problem with it because my default setting is to sort of be a saxophone player in front of the band. Philosophically, I'm a frustrated saxophone player. I mean, my concept, my lines, and everything comes from saxophone and
now you mentioned that, and having spent listening to your recordings recently, I can totally hear that, and that's a great answer, man. It's a very direct and explanatory answer. That's really cool. You see it as a line and you want that support, and you're not. I mean, Jeffrey Keys' language is as rich and complex as it gets. If he wants to, you don't mind if he's going to put that down. It's not going to. I mean, your ears are good enough to respond to it, but you don't mind if it's outside or whatever it is.
Absolutely, man. And I've played trio, and I played recently. It was a couple of years ago. I played for a week in Bern, Switzerland, with Clemens Marktel, who's a drummer from Eastern Europe, and Milan Nikolic,
cool.
Who's an incredible bass player. And sometimes I'll play trio without piano, and I'll feel like this feels naked. It feels like something's missing, and I'll try to fill it up, but it doesn't quite work. Yeah. But for me, playing in a pianoless setting has a lot to do with the chemistry of the musicians with whom I'm playing. Yeah. And I played with Milan and Clemens, and it was just the chemistry was so beautiful. I truly didn't miss the piano, and it actually, I felt like it made me play different, and it made me play more creatively. And they were the three of us were so in tune with one another that it just became this great pleasure, But I think that only happens when the musical chemistry is right. I could do it with another bass player and drummer, and it would totally suck,
Yeah, right.
Or I would feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
So,
Joe, why have you had such a strong association with the UK? I'm in Tampa, Florida now, but I'm from England, and you're in New York. But for a while, man, I had a recording of you with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra or the Scottish National Orchestra going back, and obviously with Tim, you've got an adjunct position at the Royal Academy of Music. I think you visit there regularly. Yeah. Where does the love affair with the UK, or maybe it's not, but where does that come from?
Isn't that strange, man? I mean, it's really something. I do have this like spiritual connection with the UK. my first time traveling across the pond, I played with this band called Atlantic Bridge, which was put together by a drummer named Bill Kyle, who lived in Scotland, Edinburgh, Scotland, and Tommy Smith, an 18-year-old Tommy Smith on saxophone, and a guitarist named Mitch Stein, wonderful guitarist who's worked a lot with Bill Evans and the Brother Brothers and people like that.
Oh, that Bill Evans.
Yeah, that Bill Evans. Yeah, and we would do these annual tours where we would start in the north of Scotland, like up in Ullapool and Nairn, and 3.5 weeks later find ourselves in Brighton. You know,
people don't usually survive that, you know, Joe.
Oh man, it was a blast.
People up there who never left,
Yeah, exactly.
Walking around somewhere in the north of Scotland.
Exactly.
They could have been a superstar vibes player, but no, they've been lost in the mist.
But we'd have these great times and these, like, playing every little place from the northern tip of Scotland to the southern tip of England.
And your career in New York, the coolest place. People like me come and move over here because we want to be near people like you who are in New York, and you were in northern Scotland.
Fantastic. But there were such great experiences, and I did that, you know, for a few years in a row, and started to build, you know, to forge friendships with folks in the UK. My experience with Tim Garland was amazing because Tim. I remember I was living on 21st Street and 7th Avenue in Manhattan, and Tim called me out of the blue and said, "Hi Joe, my name is Tim Garland, and I'm coming over to New York, and was wondering if maybe we could meet or, you know, possibly do some playing." And I was already a big fan of Tim because he had a band called Lamas. Don Patterson, the guitarist, and Christine Tobin, amazing singer. And I heard that album. I want to say it was called Circular Knotwork, or I don't know if I think that was the name of the album. But I heard it somewhere, and I bought like 5 or 6 copies as Christmas presents for my friends.
I used to do that.
When he called me, I said, "Man, I'm already aware of you, man." And I had a gig that was coming up in New York, and I asked him to do the gig with me.
Nice.
And we've been thick as thieves ever since, man. And the relationship with the Royal Academy actually comes from the principal percussionist in the symphony, Neil Percy, he happened to be a fan of mine, and he came to a gig I was doing in New York, and introduced himself to me afterwards, and we started a correspondence, and we're doing, you know, we've done a lot of work together since. We have an ongoing project together, and
awesome.
And I was invited to join the faculty through Jonathan Freeman Atwood, and it's been funny because it wasn't one specific thing, but these different relationships. Tommy Smith, he's another one who enables me to further my education. You know, he's a force in music, man. I mean, he's an amazing. Ask anyone who knows him, and they'll say, "Yeah, Tommy Smith, man, he's a force of nature." But I have a project that's coming out with this Scottish National Jazz Orchestra that's been postponed because of the coronavirus. But it's called Pop Rock Soul, and it's all music from the lexicon of pop, rock, and soul music. So, and I've done all of the arrangements for the Scottish National Jazz Orchestra. I asked Tommy, I said, "Would you mind if I did all the arranging for this?" So for the last year, I've been writing for large ensemble.
Wonderful. What's the material, Joe? I mean, I know.
Oh man, I'm over the moon about this project. We do Golden Slumbers, like the whole end of Abbey Road, like the suite at the end of Abbey Road. I'm doing Moby Dick by Led Zeppelin from Led Zeppelin 2. Doing an arrangement of Josie by Steely Dan from the Asia album.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear this. This is so exciting.
I'm doing Blue by Joni Mitchell.
That's hard. For big band?
No, that's going to be just for duo, for piano vibes and woodwinds.
Because so much of her, wow, I mean, man, we could talk for hours. So much of, I'm a huge Joni Mitchell fan, but so much of the brilliance of her art is from the uniqueness of her voice and the way she delivers a melodic line. And her, in the way that Golden Slumbers by the Beatles, or we're talking about Paul Simon records, you can transcribe it and arrange that, and it will come across. Some of Joni's stuff, I would imagine, is quite challenging. Her material is connected with her as a human and her instrument, the voice. And you're going to arrange that track, which sounds
originally the nice thing about this project that I'm doing, this tour I'm doing with the Scottish National Jazz Orchestra, with actually Kenny Washington, the great vocalist from New Orleans, is going to be singing with us, and he's a transcendent musician and singer.
He's amazing. I've checked him out on your recordings. Beautiful, man.
So we're going to have the words. I think these songs all are made better by the words being there too as well. Except for Blue, we're going to do as an instrumental. And the one thing that I wanted to say about sometimes arranging, sometimes it's better to leave a thing of beauty pretty much alone. Leave it the way it is. A lot of times you can really enhance something by changing it and turning it on its head. But sometimes you hurt the original piece. You get so far afield from what has inspired you about the piece in the first place that it kind of loses its meaning, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And there's a version on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, there's a version of Blue, me and Billy Childs just playing it as a duet. And except for one chord in the middle of the piece, it's all Joni's harmony. And Billy is playing what Joni played on the piano, and I'm singing Joni's.
You sing?
No, I'm playing.
Oh, sorry, you said on the
right.
bike.
I'm Joni's voice, and Billy is Joni's piano, and that's all that's needed.
Hey Joe, before we wrap up, there's something I like asking musicians. Can you give me an example of one jazz solo that always makes you smile and one jazz composition that always makes you smile? It doesn't need to be like the cleverest or the best. It's not about best. That makes you smile for whatever reason. It could be the silliest reason. It could be something really profound. But a track, whenever it comes on, it makes you smile.
First thing I think of is Wayne Shorter solo from Yes or No from the album Juju.
Cool.
Only because it's in my DNA. It's one I could sing it, and it's like all of Wayne's solos on that particular album are so looking to the future and imbued with the blues at the very same time. Wow. So that's the first thing I think about is the Wayne solo on that. But there are so many things. Wynton Kelly solo on Someday My Prince Will Come. Jimmy Heath solo on The Shadow of Your Smile from a Colombian album
nice.
called
Okay.
Time and the Place,
Right.
So, man, so much. Any Sonny Stitt, any Charlie Parker,
With those first three examples, the Jimmy Heath and the Wayne Shorter, what was the second example? I've forgotten already.
Oh, my goodness, I forget. Jimmy Heath.
Wayne Shorter on Juju. Wynton Kelly on Sunday My Prince Will Come.
Yeah. Just the intro stuff he plays, man.
Yeah.
You know.
Did you first hear those in your teen years? Can you remember?
Absolutely, and again, that's another reason why they stay with me. Although I make an effort, I think where things that we hear in our teen years really are deeply informative for us. Although there's stuff that I've heard more recently that really knocked me out. Artists like Tigran Hamasyan and people like that who I only was made aware of rather recently, but who are deeply inspiring to me too.
Yes.
When I think of a track, a song, did you ask me about a song also?
Composition, a song, a track, a specific piece of music.
I'm just gonna say Actual Proof by Herbie Hancock.
Yes.
Just like, ow,
I like Butterfly from that record more actually, because I just think that thing with he's sliding up the congas. Woo.
I've got to tell you, if I don't freeze again, I've got to tell you there was a deep music lesson for me. There was a TV show called Soundstage, 1973, and I think you can see it on YouTube. And it was Return to Forever, with Chicks band.
Yep.
Return to Forever, and then Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters. Chicks band plays all of this very dude-oriented music, lots of diminished, arpeggios and da 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 da.
Yeah, it got quite proggy. It got quite prog rocky, I think.
Right, and it was very kind of, for me, like very dude-centric. There were a bunch of dudes shaking their heads like, yeah. And then Herbie's band comes out, and Herbie's got his shades on, and he looks into the camera and says, "We'd like to send this out to all the ladies in the house."
Really?
Oh, dun.
That was my interview with the great vibes player Joe Locke, and I hope you enjoyed it. For WUSF 89.7 FM All Night Jazz, my At Home with Joe Locke series is available. Please spread the word. Thank you for watching and listening, and catch you next time.